de vuelta. Gracias por estar ahí con nosotros.
Thank you for being here, for staying tuned. From Argentina, for those of you that are joining us in YouTube or in Zoom, for those students that are in the webinar session in Zoom, for all of you, let me introduce a new topic that has become important during the pandemic, but that has been important for some time, but it has become relevant after some documents that are being required, some passports and everything that has to do with digital passport, vaccination passports. There are many documents that are being developed, and today's speaker is a worldwide expert on this topic, and is a friend of ours from this South School on Internet Governance, and a friend of Adriana also. Adriana says hi from Argentina, by the way. We have Michael Palage with us today, who lives in Florida, very, very close to the city of Miami, and he's been involved in he's always busy, but he has dedicated some time for us to address the
Hi,
issue
Mike,
of
how are you?
digital
Now
identity.
I switched to English. Don't worry, it will be in English. We have simultaneous translation, English-Spanish, with real interpreters. So if you can remember to speak not so quickly, that would be fine.
Right.
And thank you for being with us. We very much appreciate your participation here. I miss meeting you somewhere in the world every now and then. So I hope that we can meet again next year. I hope that everything goes normal again. And I wish that you and your family are okay there in the United States. We have 500 fellows from mainly Latin America, but from all over the world, because we have translation and it's virtual. So what happened with the virtual school last year and this year is that many people is interested in it, no matter where they are based. So this is the beauty of the virtuality that we are facing now. And thank you for being with us. I think this is a very important issue, digital identity. We did have this presentation from you last year, and it was very interesting, and it caused a lot of attention from all the fellows. So thank you for being with us, and welcome.
Thank you, Olga. And thank you for the invite. And as I said, I wish I was there as well, and I look forward to attending in person next year. All conditions hopefully being safe for everyone's participation.
One comment, the host, we usually have a host. You know, this has been happening for 13 years. And it's in person, not this year and the previous year, but we usually gather together in a different country every year in Latin America or the United States 2 times in the Organization of American States building. And this year, every time we have a host, and we have a virtual host this year, which is the Mintic from Colombia, that you know very well, because we have shared some activities with them in the past, you and I. So many fellows and friends from Colombia are also involved in this school, and it's good that you know that.
I look forward to working with all the colleagues. As I said, Mintic, I think we've both had a very positive, constructive working relationship with them. So would it be possible to get my slide deck on the screen?
Sí. ¿Podemos poner la presentación? Okay.
Thank you. Yes, I can. As Olga was stating, what I'm trying to do here is give an update on the presentation that I given last year. And with this speech, I'm trying to look at new standards that are beginning to emerge in the digital identity space, and also look more locally at what is going on in the Latin American region. Next slide, please. So part of what I'm going to be doing over the course of the next 25 minutes, I want to provide a roadmap so everybody knows where we're going during this time. I'm going to start out at a high global level, looking at some global trends. I am then going to get local and look at some local initiatives taking place in different Latin American countries right now. And then I will finish off the presentation by stepping out to take that broader global view. And one of the reasons that I think it is always important to look at digital identity from a global as well as local perspective is the need for interoperability, because the true connective requirement is that global interoperability. That is how digital identity will reach its true potential. Next slide, please. So one of the things that there's not a lot of there's very few positive things that can be said about COVID-19 and the tragic that it has impacted on the global community. Perhaps the one of the few, if only, silver linings has been the ability for the global pandemic to act as an accelerator for the subject matter of digital identity. Most experts will acknowledge that projects that we're looking at being implemented within 2 to 3 or 5 year period of time were basically implemented within weeks, if not months, after the transition of a significant portion of the global workforce from on-premise to a work-from-home arrangement. So that is something that has probably been one of the primary drivers of digital identity. Another area, less from the private sector, but more from the public sector, has been some of the massive fraud that has been documented with some of the government stimulus payments. This has been particularly true in the United States, where there is a lack of a national ID. So that was rather right ground for a lot of fraud and misuse, which right now there are estimates that with tens of billions, right now over 50 billion by some accounts, of fraud in the US alone. One of the other topics that I think people will be seeing as a result of the global pandemic and this issue of digital identity is the topic of COVID passports. This is a very sensitive issue because it gives rise to a number of civil liberty and privacy concerns. So this is something that will continue to be a topic of debate, and I think will be an important driver for moving forward with more operational deployments of digital identity solutions. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I think is always important when talking about digital identity is, what is the definition? For purposes of identity, there's a rather, I usually use this definition. This comes from the NIST, one of the NIST documents, the 800 series. And it defines identity as a set of physical and behavioral characteristics by which an individual is uniquely recognized. And that is one of the ways that I, myself, as Michael D. Palage, is able to be distinguished from my son, Michael Felipe Palage. That is, we have the same names, different birth dates, other qualifications and characteristics. So that to me is a good working definition that everyone, I would say, can generally agree with. I have not seen any pushback on that. If I could go to the next slide. When we get into, though, however, coming up with a definition of digital identity, this is where there is a much broader, diverse viewpoint of what constitutes a digital identity. And some of the terms you'll likely hear in discussing the concept of digital identities are some of the terms that you see here on the screen: authorization, verifiable claims, SSI, or self-sovereign or user-centric identity, trust frameworks. So one of the things that is difficult is trying to wrap one's arms around this evolving and very dynamic definition of identity. And if we could go to the next slide. One of the things that I've tried to do in this representation is define identity within the context of identity access management. This is a well-recognized concept within the IT and InfoSec space. And what I like about it is it provides what I call three concentric overlapping themes. The first is identity proofing. And what identity proofing means at its most fundamental level, is there a Michael David Palage that exists? And is the person claiming to be Michael David Palage, in fact, Michael David Palage? This is important. This is of growing importance, considering the growing use of synthetic identity fraud. So identity proofing is one of the key fundamental building blocks of a broader digital identity solution. The next important component in an IAM solution is the concept of authentication. And what authentication is this is key to the concepts of how one signs on securely to a system. So when someone claims to be Michael David Palage is trying to access a computer network, is it in fact myself that is undertaking that action? So that is the concept of authentication. Authorization is a concept that has gotten a lot more recognition, particularly in the security space. So those fellows that are looking at security, you have probably heard the term zero trust. So zero trust is about the concept that once someone has authenticated into your network, that individual does not gain total access to all resources. There is a very granular level based upon their authorization into what files they can have access to. And the reason I've tried to overlap these three concepts relating to identity is to focus on that middle ground, that common point of intersection of what I call the credential. One of the things that is a growing concept, and we will get to this a little later on in the presentation, is how these credentials can be stored in a wallet and used by an individual to make certain representations. And that credential is kind of a glue that intersects at the points of identity proofing, authentication, and authorization. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I would like to discuss are some of the identity-related standards that some of the fellows may encounter. One of the most oldest is the X509. This was an ITU standard. This was something that has traditionally been used by certificate authorities, mutual TLS. I would say, while this has been a very resourceful standard, it is still widely used. It is not the most user-friendly. As I would joke with Olga, neither of us would want our mothers configuring an X509 certificate to have a positive user experience. Now, one of the more recent standards that has really helped, I would say, in making identity a more widely accepted concept is the work in connection with OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect, and with the OpenID Foundation. And the standard here is the concept which has powered so many people to be able to log in with a single sign-on, whether that be Google, Facebook, any of the major social media companies. So this is something that has really brought to the masses the concept of federating identity, and has been good. Obviously, there are some privacy considerations with regard to that has been a pushback, and something that has actually been trying to be addressed. One of the other more new standards that has been talked about is the concept of verifiable claims or decentralized identifiers, commonly referred to as DIDs. This is some standards work that has been taking place within the WC3 and is most often associated with blockchain and distributed ledger technology. Another important standard has been the work of the Fast Identity Online, FIDO. FIDO has been key with a lot of the security tokens, the YubiKeys, myself and many others may use. A lot of these devices, the FIDO standards are now being embedded into smartphones as well as computers that I think are really going to be critically important to bringing identity to the masses. And the last one here, which I think is something that is probably of most interest. There is an initiative going on right now within the ISO, the International Standards Organization, regarding mobile driver's license. And this initiative is intended to come up with a global, universal standard for a mobile driver's license. And as I will show later on in the presentation, there are some companies that are looking to aggressively implement this technology. And I think that this is something that potentially has the biggest impact, particularly for me here in the United States. While I have had a passport for most of my life, there is a large portion of Americans that do not have a passport and do not travel abroad. The fact that we do not have a national ID, it is literally the mobile driver's license that is the go-to source as a source of identity proofing for most U.S. citizens. So I think the mobile driver's license is something that is really going to be transformative, and you will be seeing a lot of this in the news, I would say, over the next 12 to 18 months. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to do here, and I will not dwell on this long, but I wanted to have this part of the record here. Gartner is a well-respected publication that everyone follows. And one of the things that Gartner is known for is they put out what they call their hype cycles. And what I have done here is this is the current hype cycle for identity access and management in 2021. And one of the things, if you look down at the bottom of this hype cycle, you will see some of these various phases: innovation trigger, peak of inflated expectations, the trough of disillusionment, the slope of enlightenment, and then you have the plateau of productivity. And what I think is very interesting here is if you look at some of the material I was talking about in the preceding slides about FIDO, which is here, bring your own identity, OpenID Connect. Here you also have OAuth 2 on the upward slope. I think what you are seeing here is a lot of the stuff that I am documenting is kind of out of the hype cycle and is now coming into, as you will see, that slope of enlightenment, where these solutions will be rolling out and being deployed in a much more rapid pace. Next slide, please. So now what I want to do is now I want to begin to switch and drill down to some of the local developments that I see happening in Latin America based on what I've seen at an international level and some of my discussions with my colleagues. Soyu is an initiative that is being driven in Colombia by 3 of the largest banks. This initiative has received regulatory approval from the Colombian regulatory body. And what they have done here is they have streamlined the identity proofing process for users as well as the reliance by third parties. So what they have is there is an app that can be downloaded on your smartphone. After it is downloaded, you then will you will fill in the information, you will do a one-time password authentication. You will then input your information, do a selfie, and then that will be verified. And after those 6 steps are done, you will then be issued a digital identity that can be used. Now, what is very interesting here is this is modeled after a number of initiatives taking place within the Scandinavian region, particularly Sweden, which has bankid.com, and Norway, which has bankid.no. And in both of these situations, what is very interesting is it is the private sector that is taking the lead to bring about this digital identity solution. And one of the I believe common viewpoints that Olga and I have historically shared is this idea of public-private partnerships, that some things are so complex that it can neither be done solely by the private sector or the public sector. And I think this is an interesting example of how you have the private sector taking a lead, but doing this in close collaboration with the Colombian government to ensure that all regulatory requirements are met. Next slide, please. This next company is Serpro, and this is an initiative within Brazil. So within Brazil, there have been several accredited certificate authorities that have been authorized to issue legally recognized digital identity certificates. Serpro is one of these companies. It is, I believe, one of the larger companies. It has over 6,000 professionals, and they have locations in the capitals of every Brazilian state. And they offer a range of services, which I have listed on the slide here. There is Data Valid, which is a real-time data validation service. They have Pro ID, which is a mobile app, which is seeking to transition from traditional paper and plastic wallets or credentials to a more digital one. So again, this is interesting. I believe Serpro is funded by the government, but does compete with other certificate authorities. But this again shows this idea of providing consumers with choice and fostering a public-private partnership on this very complex and important issue. Next slide. And I apologize because I am probably going to mispronounce this. Truora is my attempt at pronouncing that. And this is an interesting company because in their mission statement, and if you could see this on the website if you want to go there, their mission statement is eradicating fraud in Latin America. And that is their raison d'etre of existing as a company. And they offer a range of services similar to what Serpro offers. Background checks, digital identity, signals, and a true sign. This company right now has already created working relationships with hundreds of companies within 9 countries within Latin America. I only listed 6. I was unable to find the other 3, so my apologies there. But this, as I said, this is a company. I do believe they have offices, although they have a large footprint in Latin America. I believe they also do have some of their offices located, I believe, in San Francisco. So this, again, is a company, when I was talking about global and local perspectives, that has that mix. Next slide, please. So for those fellows that may be doing research in this area, one of the most valuable resources I would direct you to is some of the work, invaluable work that has been done by the World Bank and the ID for D initiative. And what you have here is the Findex Survey from 2020. And what I wanted to highlight here is the share of population, over the age of 15 without a national ID. And what I wanted to highlight here are those countries with the higher non-ID validation, and how that sometimes, but not always, corresponds to the income level in country. I don't want to go into this too much because there is so much data here. Those fellows that want to study, I would really advise you to look at this data. I think it provides a really important snapshot for what countries I think are doing a really good job of providing their citizens with IDs, and those that perhaps are a little lacking. And that's not a bad thing. That's just a reality. But the more we could share information, I think that is how we collectively, as a profession, raise the high tide in the harbor that raises all ships. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I think is really interesting, and now we're going back to a global perspective to bring it in the last 4 to 5 minutes of my speech here. What Apple has done, I think, has been very unique as a company. They have made, for those of you that are Apple users, you have seen how they have committed with some of their most recent iOS updates to empower you, the user, to better determine what information about you is shared with the different app owners or app providers. So Apple has, I wouldn't say doubled down, tripled down. They are all in on this concept of empowering the user to control their data. And to show you this, I just literally, these clips, the 3 clips on the screen, were literally taken, I think, within the last 10 days as I was preparing this presentation. And I would like to begin with the bottom one from the Wall Street Journal, because what it shows, and this is where, when the banks have actually started to approach Visa to say they may want to adjust, they want to evaluate how Apple Pay transactions are being processed. And I think it is suffice it to say, banks would not be making this request if Apple Pay was not having an impact on the marketplace. So I think that is something that, is a noteworthy point. The other thing that I wanted to go to is this, the one article in the upper left. Arizona is going to be one of the first states to allow drivers to add that mobile digital driver's license to their Apple Wallet. So no longer will I need to go to the airport, TSA security, and have to carry a physical plastic copy of my driver's license or a hard copy of my passport. I will now be able to store a copy of my mobile driver's license in my Apple Wallet and use that for identity proofing. The other thing I wanted to point to, the final article over to the right, is part of Apple's commitment to privacy can be seen by one of the newest updates, where they are now empowering users to have burner email addresses. So you literally can use an email address, use it, forget it. You don't have to worry about spam filling in your inbox. So I would really encourage anyone in this space, Apple, pay close attention to what Apple is doing, as well as some of the credit card providers as well. They have been very active in this space. Next slide, please. The other development that I think is worthy of looking at with more focus and attention is the European Union and what they are doing with their ITIS regulations. So ITIS stands for the Electronic Identification, Authentication, and Trust Services. This was originally enacted in 2014, went into effect in 2016. The European Union right now is reevaluating this. And part of the reason that they are undertaking this detailed evaluation is they have identified some shortcomings in the original regulation. One of the most important shortcomings was, as originally designed, it was focused primarily on the public sector. And it was the inability of the private sector to connect and fully utilize this network that has caused them to reevaluate. So again, I want to go back to the concept that I think Olga and I believe in about this concept of public-private partnership. And I think this is what the Europeans are doing as part of this reevaluation. And one of the key things, remember those credentials I talked to you about early, the same type of credential that is going to be the mobile driver's license that is going to be stored in the Apple Wallet. The European Union is going to come up with they are going to be promoting and deploying a European digital identity wallet. And one of the things that is very neat in the current draft regulations is the requirement that the use of that wallet be free of charge to natural persons. Last slide, and I think we're almost done here. I think I'm only 1 minute over time. So those fellows that are really interested in digital identity and how they could have a role within their government, or even within the private and public sector, the ITU provided this document called the Digital Identity Roadmap Guide, which is, I think, an excellent resource for anyone starting out in identity. And one of the things that this document keys on is it recognizes that there is not a one-size-fits-all model. There are for different governments, different cultures, different regions. So I would, again, use this as a starting point for anyone serious to get involved in the broader identity space. This is, I would say, a must read, and there's a lot of interesting case studies that they've included. Final slide, which I believe is just my thank you. And I know we have probably, I think I've done it in 30 minutes. But if we do have time, if there are any questions, Olga, I would be more than happy to answer them either here or, as last year, please reach out to me via email, LinkedIn. I welcome the exchange and the questions that I received last year, and looking forward to additional questions this year.
Thank you very much, Mike. Very, very interesting. One question, my question before we go to other questions. This document that you mentioned from ITU, it's available on the internet, or it's a paid document?
Yes.
Okay.
No,
so they can just go and find it. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I had the URL before. I unfortunately took it out as I was trying to save space. But if you just Googled ITU Digital Identity Roadmap Guide, the picture on there is the front cover. So it should be easily Googled and located.
Thank you. Some comments that come to my mind. In Buenos Aires City, Argentina, it's a federal country, so Buenos Aires City is like another province. So we can have our driver license and our national identity document in our cell phone, and that's linked to a website that it's related with the government. Would that be kind of a digital identity thing?
Yes, it can. And in most cases, it comes down to what the local laws will recognize for entering into a contract or reliance upon parties. So in that scenario, and I welcome to have this conversation with you offline over the course of the next couple of days or weeks to look at that. But yes, that to me would be an example of how that infrastructure can be put in place. I believe with the Argentinian CCTLD, there was attempts to incorporate identity proofing and sort of verifying some of the documents. So to me, this is an example of how can you take these credentials and make it easier for people to enter into trusted relationships or engagements. That is what digital identity is about. And one final point that I did not make is a lot of times when people talk about digital identity, they focus on large companies. I actually believe that digital identity is perhaps most important for small businesses. Because when you're a small business, you have to be very careful on who you're dealing with, because unlike a large company that accepts a certain amount of fraud or loss, you don't have that ability when you're a small business. So identity, I think, not only can benefit individuals and empowering them to control their information, I think this could be a tremendous resource for small businesses, particularly as they emerge from the global pandemic and as they seek to get back up to speed, full speed.
Another comment at the federal tax agency in Argentina. I lost my password 2 weeks ago. I don't know why, or it didn't recognize it. I said, "Oh my God, what I will do?" And I had to do some things there, some invoices, and they drove me to online process with a selfie and some other elements from my digital identity document, and it was very quickly updated. And that really caught my attention because it was quick and fast, and I felt it was reliable because now I have my new password, and it was like 2 minutes. So that would be also somehow a digital identity thing?
Correct. And what happens is, what's interesting there is in digital identity, I did not touch upon this, but there is this concept called identity assurance levels. Under the NIST guidelines, it's identity assurance level 1, 2, 3. And under ITIS, it is called low, substantial, and high. So when you're looking at these different identity frameworks, most of them tend to have 3 buckets. The example you gave there of reissuing a government passport, that actually would be of the highest level of an identity assurance level 3. And part of what happens is pre-COVID, most of that identity assurance level 3, getting a passport reissued, required one going physically in person to do that. But what happened is governments realized as part of the lockdown, they had to engage in this. So this is where some of the standards and the developments have allowed for this higher identity assurance level done in a remote environment. And one of the things that you probably had to do is not only take a selfie, but you probably had to do a liveness test. To show you that you were alive. So this is part of what I would say the cat and mouse game, the bad people that want to try to figure out how to steal or manipulate these. And that's why, to me, I think that this is a tremendous opportunity for fellows in this area, whether from a technology standpoint or from a governance and policy standpoint. It is a great opportunity to get in, make an impact in society, and have a positive impact.
I have questions from fellows. I will stop asking my questions. It's encryption a synonym of protecting the identity and privacy? And I have another one. It is correct to have many ID providers, such as enterprises or bank initiatives? That's a question that came to my mind when we were talking about Soyu. What happens with the governmental ID register? I am concerned about to have many databases with personal information.
Okay, so I'll take the last one first, and then we'll go back to the encryption one. So one of the things that I think is going to be key is following what happens with the European Union, because the ITIS, not only does the European Union moving forward with the ITIS, there already exists the GDPR. And one of the requirements of the GDPR is data minimization. So I will be looking very closely at how the European Union tries to thread that needle on empowering digital identity, having that identity be controlled, a very user-centric. The user is controlling their identity instead of some third-party social media company, and how that goes about data minimization. I have some ideas on this from a technology standpoint. A very much deep dive that it would take much longer than we have remaining today. But if there are any fellows that are interested in that data minimization approach, how that could be done, I would welcome them to reach out to me. I believe the second question that was asked was talking about encryption. So encryption itself, whether you're talking about, X509, which is a public-private key pair, or whether you're talking about the blockchain and that public-private key pair, encryption is only as strong as the security of the keys and the endpoints. So this is something where I think technology is important, where you want to make sure that the technology is in place, but equally as important as the technology implementation is the governance and those things. And the one final point that I will make, and this is one of the reasons why I tend to be a little critical of some of the more, what I would call, hardcore self-sovereign. I am all for user-centric control, but there are some, what I would say, pure people from a self-sovereign that says, I should be able to own my own identity and I don't need to rely upon a government issued ID or anything like that. I alone have the ability to represent who I am. I generally agree that that's possible in some ecosystems, but in order to have trust and, more importantly, accountability, and accountability is very key. If someone has anonymity, then there can be no accountability. So that, to me, I think is something that your fellows that are going to be looking at policy, how do you balance what I would call a pseudonymous identifier? So a pseudonymous identifier is something that provides the user with privacy, but if there is a set of conditions, a due process requires the unmasking of that individual, I think that is very important. And these are going to be some of the hard decisions that will be addressed by your fellows in the future.
One last question in a minute. From fellows, which is the relationship with blockchain and digital identity? Has it something to deal with?
Sure. So as I mentioned, one of the technology standards that has been emerging within the identity space is the verifiable claims and decentralized identifiers, DIDs. Right now, most of the implementations of the verifiable claims and DIDs has generally involved either blockchain or distributed ledger technology. I would say it is possible to implement verifiable claims in a non-blockchain capacity, but at the end of the day, all the blockchain is doing in the identity space is serving as an endpoint to do the verification. So, just like you have an X509 certificate with your public-private key pair, the blockchain is the same equivalent. And one of the things, Olga, I think you and I have discussed, particularly based upon our long history within the ICANN domain name space, is the DNS itself has the ability through resource records, through DANE, to store these keys or perhaps forward to UUIDs and facilitate the lookup and resolution of identity. So to me, I think it is important for any technology to be agnostic. There should not be a winner or loser based upon, you went blockchain or you went, OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect. Most good solutions will be technology agnostic. And this again comes back to the importance for those policy fellows to make sure they get the governance framework right to ensure that interoperability and neutrality.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And also for being so generous with your time, because we are like 15 minutes more than what was agreed with you. And I hope that you are okay and that your family are okay there, and have a nice rest of the day. And we have to talk about other things soon. And many thanks for being with us in the school. Very much appreciated. And regards from our team, from Adrian and our team here in Buenos Aires.
And I look forward to seeing you in person next year.
Hopefully.
So,
Bye-bye. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Mike. Bye.
Bye.